We're opening the vault, but not for myths or legends. We're here for a forensic analysis, a deep dive into declassified government documents about Nikola Tesla. The evidence starts now. You know, they say the official story is what they tell you, but the truth is in the documents. And this one right here. This is the first page of an FBI memo from just days after Tesla's death. This single page kicks off a story of seizure, secrecy, and suppression that spans decades. So let's peel back the layers, one document at a time. All right, so picture this. It's New York City, January 1943. We're right in the thick of World War II. Nikola Tesla is found dead in his hotel room, and almost immediately the U.S. government makes its move. Now, this wasn't just some standard procedure. This was a swift, decisive seizure of an entire lifetime of work. We're talking trunks of research, schematics, personal notes. They took everything. And get this, one of the most intriguing items they confiscated was a black notebook with just one word on the cover: government. Now, what's really fascinating here is the language the FBI used internally. Publicly, the story was going to be very, very different. But behind closed doors, you can feel the concern. That phrase, vitally interested, that's not casual. It signals a top-level national security threat. They were terrified this stuff could end up with the Axis powers. So with all of Tesla's research locked down, the government needed an official story, right? They had to control the narrative. So they brought in an expert to take a look at the more radical ideas tucked away in those notes. And that expert was Dr. John G. Trump. Yup. That Trump. A super respected MIT engineer, a government consultant. He was the perfect guy to give their findings some real scientific credibility. And his assignment? He was given just 3 days to sift through decades of research from one of history's greatest inventive minds. And this was his conclusion: a complete, total dismissal. Trump's report basically said that Tesla's later work, including his famous death ray, was just the rambling of a brilliant but aging genius. It was speculative, philosophical, but the key takeaway was, it's not workable. And that became the official story for the next 70 years. So that should have been it, right? Case closed. The government's own expert said there was nothing to see here. But the thing is, the paper trail, all those memos stamped secret for decades, well, they tell a very, very different story. So let's put the official story aside for a minute and start our own forensic breakdown. Let's analyze this so-called death ray, not as a fantasy, but as a serious piece of proposed military hardware. Tesla had a name for it: Teleforce. But he didn't really see it as a weapon for aggression. He saw it as the ultimate defensive tool. A particle beam so powerful, it could create this impenetrable wall around a country, making war totally impossible. It was the ultimate deterrent. And look, this wasn't just some idea scribbled on a napkin. This is an actual drawing that was included with his proposal. You can see a detailed schematic for the powerhouse and the high-potential terminal, the very heart of the weapon. This was a concept he'd been working on for years, a system he truly believed was ready to be built. In his own writings, Tesla broke the weapon down into these 4 core concepts. And what's really incredible is how he was already tackling the biggest problems with particle beams. He's describing how to generate and amplify immense power, then project it with an open-ended vacuum tube. I mean, these were real engineering solutions for a theoretical weapon. Okay, so we've looked at the design. Now let's switch hats. Let's put on the hat of an intelligence analyst and look at the internal government memos to see how this speculative idea was actually being discussed behind closed doors. And this slide just lays the contradiction bare. It's brilliant. On the left, you've got the public story, the one crafted by the Trump report. On the right, you've got the reality from their own internal memos. Speculative versus vitally interested. No workable principles versus a very real fear of the Soviets getting the research. No hazard versus a secret classification that lasted for decades. These 2 columns don't just disagree, they describe 2 totally different realities. And look at this, a communication from 1983, a full 40 years after Tesla died, stamped secret. They're talking about a book on his death rise, which is probably just a typo for death ray with the Air Force. So if the idea was so worthless, why was it still a secret being discussed at this level 4 decades later? And that concern wasn't just abstract. This memo right here explicitly states the fear that the Soviet Union had its hands on Tesla's work and was actually developing its own death rays. This adds this whole chilling Cold War layer to all the secrecy. And here we are right back at the beginning. Another internal document talking about the initial seizure. But now we see it with totally new eyes, don't we? We understand this wasn't just some simple precautionary measure. This was the first step in a long-term strategy of classification and control over a technology they publicly denied but privately feared. So this brings us to the legacy of Tesla's classified work. Because as it turns out, the ideas that were dismissed as philosophical back in 1943, they didn't just vanish. They evolved. Just look at the lineage here. On the left, you've got Tesla's powerhouse concept from the 1930s. On the right, a representation of a modern directed energy weapon. Okay, the technology today is way more complex, obviously, but the fundamental principle, projecting concentrated energy to neutralize a target, that is exactly what Tesla was describing. You can literally trace a direct line through history. Tesla proposes the idea in the 30s, the government grabs it in 43, and then, boom. In the 1980s, the Star Wars program makes particle beam research a top military priority. Today, these things, they aren't science fiction anymore. They're a real and growing part of modern military arsenals. And it turns out that official dismissal by Dr. Trump, it was never the only opinion inside the government. Research shows that some key people over at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, the heart of advanced weapons development, took Tesla's particle beam concepts very, very seriously. They kept studying them long after the official report said they were junk. Over 80 years. Think about that for a second. That's how long these ideas have been behind the curtain, evolving from a speculative proposal seized from a hotel room into some of the most advanced military tech on the planet. So, all of this leads us to one final, really unavoidable question. If the one idea we know about, this so-called death ray, was publicly called worthless, but secretly became the foundation for advanced weapons programs, then what else was in those files? What other speculative or philosophical ideas were seized from his hotel room that day? What research is still considered so transformative, or maybe so dangerous, that it can never see the light of day? That's the question that's still locked in the vault.